Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking time and maybe spending your lunch if you're here in the Central Time Zone, but taking time to talk with us today about women's philanthropy. I'm so thrilled to have this topic and this opportunity. It's always fun for me at the center to work with colleagues across the country, and this one's in particularly warms my heart because of the fact that I found out I love studying history and the women of history and philanthropy when I was in my doctoral program at Indiana University. So our speaker is actually from the Women's Philanthropy Institute there. And I'm thrilled that we're able to partner on this to bring some information to hopefully help your organizations. So for those of you who are new, because we know we had over 200 people register for this, we're excited to have so many people care about the topic. But some of you may be new to our center here at Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy at Texas A&M. So just wanted to let you know a little bit about what we do. We see I have our mission statement at the top. We are trying to help build a vibrant philanthropic sector throughout the state and anywhere that people care about the work we do. And we do that primarily through research outreach and learning. So the common language we use around that is we try to prepare nonprofit leaders and help build their organizations. And then also help people understand scholarship. And that's part of what I love doing is translating scholarship into what's useful in your own offices. And upcoming, we have a few other outside of today's awesome program that Jackie's going to provide for us. We have some events that you could attend either in person in March. We have our leadership and board service. Then we have our March webinar because we do one of these every month. That's going to be Dr. Kenny Taylor. And Dr. William Brown is going to present in April. Then we have an online program that's new, Dr. Brown's leading based on some work he's done with systems thinking. If you're interested in that, you can always reach out and let us know. Or you could just scan right there. Our awesome marketing team has put the code in. You can just register if you'd like. So on with the content. How's that? Just a little plug for who we are. But I have really been interested in women and how they've been able to change the world. And in the last couple years, I came across two headlines. You'll see the one down in the bottom left-hand corner that I can't forget, that women are beginning to lead in philanthropy. Another one actually said we're coming into our own in philanthropy, and that was about 2021, 22 time period. And that really is so insulting when we think about what women have done over time. Um, my initial reaction on the slide was just like, what? Yeah, we've been doing this for centuries. And one of my favorite research projects I've ever done was actually studying uh, what women did in World War I beyond nursing. Because remember, we were allowed to do that. I wanted to see what women were doing outside the box, how they were being sort of rebellious and changing the world. And it was the most fascinating project that I've ever really worked on because of what we've learned in that process. And you see that, so I pulled some of the pictures. I didn't want to miss this opportunity to pull some of these pictures that I got from archives. So these are from the time period of women serving in overseas. But during that research, I discovered historian Kathleen McCarthy. And any of you who are really interested in understanding more about the history of women, she's done a fabulous job um, trying to help us understand the impact of women. So you'll notice that she was writing that women in the late 1700s helped lay the groundwork for a parallel female empire of philanthropy to complement the growing variety of male-controlled institutions forged by men like Benjamin Franklin. Okay, so what a lot of her work has done is looked at this parallel power structure that as we were building our country and men were starting new industries and businesses, women were actually building their own social structure and building all of our nonprofit organizations that we're thinking of. So if you're interested in that, there's one of her books that I recommend is American Creed, Philanthropy and the Rise of Civil Society. It's from 1700 to 1865. You can see a lot more, but that's just a really interesting sort of time period before we start thinking about the golden age of philanthropy in the early 1900s. But she these ladies weren't alone. Here's a slide that I've provided in case any of you want to dig into any of these women. There's absolutely too many that we could, to focus or even to think about trying to mention in 1 hour webinar. But the one thing that I found in the research is what they did was they were really creative, very entrepreneurial, throughout, from the 1700s on as I've been studying it. And what they did was they very specifically took advantage of the chaotic situation they were in and used that to expand their scope of control and to create new organizations and shape this, society as they would like it, well, within whatever the constraints were that they had. So I just wanted to give you a few women, if you wanted to go on and research. There's another book that I recommend, Notable American Philanthropists, that has really short 4 or 5 page biographies that you can get in and learn more about these women if you'd like to. So despite all the obstacles that they faced, primarily gender limitations of the time and the fact they couldn't control their own funding, these women were very determined to make a difference. And what I concluded with the paper that I was writing and was the fact that women not only made social progress, but they started developing leadership skills and ways that it made it clear that we did have our own structure within to work and advance society. And one of my favorite quotes was here by Eva Moore, where she wrote that women have proved their worth in new fields of activity, right? They've developed these unknown qualities, right? That was unknown for us to be active, but they've developed these qualities of leadership and management that will not be allowed to lie dormant. And I always think that's so powerful. It shows what we can do if we embrace this. So that's just framing a little bit around the fact that we aren't just coming into our own in philanthropy. We've been doing this a long time. But the difference is we have more power than we have had in the past, and we actually have more assets and control of our assets from businesses we've built or what we expect from wealth transfer. So with that, would love to introduce now our speaker for today, Jackie Ackerman. She's the interim director of WPI. And the Women's Philanthropy Institute really believes that gender matters in philanthropy and solving the world's complex problems. And one of the things that I learned is that we women tend to think that collective action is a powerful thing. We can come together and get things done. And so they have some great research around that as well. Jackie has been with WPI leading its research agenda and really serves as the primary author on most of WPI's research reports. So she's the one that knows all the data, which is why I'm going to end up turning it over to her in just a second. She joined the School of Philanthropy now 12 years ago. Wow, almost 13 years ago. Look at that, time flies. After she got her Master of Public Affairs from the School of Public Environmental Affairs in Bloomington, so our SPIA partner. Jackie, with that, please take over and, share what you are learning about research.
All right, had to find that mute button. Thank you so much, Angela, for the invitation and also for that very excellent historical overview. That is one thing that this presentation does not have is some of that historical perspective. And it is so true. Women have been doing this for centuries, really as long as there have been humans, we have been involved in generosity. And so really grateful for that framing. Just to give you all a little bit of a roadmap for what we're doing this hour, I'll start off just with an introduction to the Women's Philanthropy Institute, why we do the work that we do, and then I'll dig into some broad research findings that we have accumulated over the last 15 plus years that WPI has been doing research. And then I'll focus in on our most recent research and the trends that we see in women's philanthropy, both in 2025 and moving forward. And then we will have some time, hopefully, at the end for some Q&A or for some discussion. So just to level set where WPI is, we are part of the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. We have, of course, academic programs, continuing education for fundraisers, our own research arm. But then, as you can see on the slide, we have 3 different institutes, the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving, the Mays Family Institute on Diverse Philanthropy, and then, of course, the Women's Philanthropy Institute. And our mission is to conduct, curate, and disseminate research that grows women's philanthropy. And so our kind of North Star is a vision where women donors understand and use their growing power and influence to support causes that they care about, where fundraisers, nonprofit leaders are taking women seriously, approaching them, making asks of them in ways that appeal to them. And then ultimately, a world where both women and men are not just giving, but giving more and giving more intentionally and effectively. Um, as I mentioned, we've been doing this research for quite a while. So if you have questions that aren't specifically about today's topics, I'm happy to answer any and all during the Q&A. So I'll start with some level setting before diving into our most recent study. One question we get a lot, especially for folks who are less familiar with our work, is, well, why focus on women? Why do we have to separate women out? Why not just focus on donors broadly? And the answer is that essentially today we have a ton of data that demonstrate that women's influence in all areas of society is growing, and that has implications for how much patterns of women's giving. And so fundraisers, development officers, but also donors themselves really need to understand how women give in these unique ways. By most measures, today's demographic changes have been beneficial for women. You kind of see this in everyday life. We know that more and more women have increased access to education, income, and wealth, essentially all the variables that predict whether someone is going to be able to be generous at a certain level. We know that women's wealth is rising. Women today control 40% of global wealth. And we all talk about the great wealth transfer that is actively happening. Women are expected to inherit 70% of the wealth that will be passed down over those generations. And we know that women tend to inherit twice, once from their parents and once from a spouse. At the same time, more women are the primary breadwinners in their families. We know that 40% of US women who work out earn their husbands. And we know that more women are financially independent. Some reports suggest that up to 90% of women are the CFO of their households, or essentially they're managing the day-to-day finances, bill paying, et cetera. And women are outpacing men in education, earning a majority of degrees at all levels. And these factors are all central to women's expanding role in philanthropy. Women are also more likely to give to charity. And our research at WPI shows that when women's wealth grows, that's good news for philanthropy, since women give more and give differently compared to their male counterparts. Not only that, but our research has shown that the more women's wealth grows, the greater portion they tend to give to charitable organizations. And then how women just think about and treat their wealth differs as well. There's a US Trust study that shows that women are nearly twice as likely as men to say that giving to charity is the most satisfying aspect for them of having wealth. So just a quick overview, you may hear these bullet points a couple times, but of our most basic bullet points are research and data that has been proven kind of over and over from study to study. Women are more likely to give compared to similarly situated men. Women tend to give more overall, but they're spreading it across more causes and organizations, so they're not always getting the credit they deserve for their generosity. Women tend to give differently than men. I'll talk in detail about that a little bit later. And women's motivations to give are different from men's. They tend to be more altruistic, empathic, and focused on the end result or beneficiary of their generosity. When we look at how factors like age, family dynamics, marital status, and income influence giving by men and women, the bottom line is that women across racial and ethnic groups, across different generations, across other demographics, are more likely than their male counterparts to give. The data about single women is compelling in particular. For those of you who are in the research world, it's a little bit easier to piece out that gender difference when we're comparing single women to single men as opposed to folks within households. So across race, ethnicity, and income levels, we know that single women are more likely to give compared to single men. When we look across generations, We know that younger generations, millennials in particular, those single women are holding their own in terms of giving. And we know that up to 70% of millennial women take the lead in their household's financial decisions. Giving trends seem to hold true across the lifestyle or across the life cycle. So not only are younger women getting more involved in that decision making, but around retirement even, we have found that single women and married couples are more likely to give and give higher amounts compared to men. They also volunteer more. We know that marriage affects giving in positive ways. Being married increases both the likelihood and the amount of giving, and married couples tend to give more to charity compared to single men or women. And we found that these broad trends hold true online as well as offline. More women than men tend to give gifts on social media platforms and other online giving platforms. Within households, women also have increasing influence on household finances, including giving decisions. One of our recent studies a couple of years ago looked at how households make these giving decisions. It's been a few years at this point since we did the study, but before that, the subject hadn't really been examined since 2005. So as you can see on the slide, the largest share of households makes giving decisions together. That's about 6 in 10 households that make joint giving decisions. Seems like a lot. It is the largest piece of the pie, but it's actually a decline from 2005 numbers when it was closer to 75% of households making decisions about giving jointly. Sole decision making, essentially where one partner is making all the giving decisions for the household, is on the rise. So back in 2005, about 10% of couples had one partner making all the giving decisions. But in 2020, that was 27%. And as you can see, when one partner in the household is making those giving decisions, it's more likely to be a woman. So why does this very boring pie chart matter? Well, as with so many of our other studies, it makes it clear that engaging women in these conversations about giving is imperative. So we tell fundraisers to make sure that women are at the table. Don't assume you know who the decision maker is in the household. Don't assume it's the person with the higher income. And that is true for donors as well, who, if they feel that they're being ignored or not involved in all of the conversations and decisions about philanthropy that they want to be, they can join that conversation. Women do have this power and influence and can use that to be involved in these conversations about giving. So in addition to being more likely to give and giving more, women tend to give differently than men. And our shorthand for that is on the slide. Women tend to give broadly to a range of causes and organizations. Sometimes that means that women donors are not recognized for the full scale of their generosity. Women also tend to give collectively. They're giving together. That might mean they formally are joining a giving circle, or they have a more informal community of donors, kitchen table philanthropy, as it's sometimes called. But really, that communal aspect is key. Donors, especially women donors, want to give together and learn from and share with one another. And then finally, women give holistically. Our research shows that women tend to use all of their resources to create the change they want to see in the world. And that means that they are thinking beyond just writing a check or inputting a credit card number to a traditional 501c3 organization. It means that they are investing their wealth in socially or environmentally responsible ways. They're shopping at stores that they know share their values or give away a percentage of their profits. They are donating their time, serving on nonprofit committees and boards, and they're sharing their voices, whether that's a simple social media post or a public speaking engagement. They are talking about the causes that they care about and trying to bring attention to them. So now that you have some background about our broad research findings and the motivations for us to do what we do, would love to share about trends. So every year, WPI tries to predict the trends shaping philanthropy and women's philanthropy in particular. So as you can see on the slide, this year we see some big picture themes of resilience, innovation, and collaboration. We see that even during times of crisis or when we have these broad societal divides or challenges, women donors still continue to demonstrate strategic giving. Other topics that we'll address today, like the influence of sports, technology, and activism, are all shaping how we address equity and inclusion. And then finally, amid polarization in the political sphere, gender and health disparities, and issues like that, philanthropy really has a role to play in bridging divides and driving systemic change. So the first trend that I'll talk through builds on our most recent research. It's a study we published in December called Women Give 2024, 20 Years of Gender and Giving Trends. And our rationale for conducting this study was threefold. You can see the research question itself on our screen. But first, we often talk about how women are more likely to give and give more compared to similarly situated men. I feel like I've said it like 5 times at this point so far. But that's often based on point in time data from 1 year. And so when we have been asked, how do those dynamics change over time? Is that every year? We haven't had an answer until now. Second, other research out of the Lilly Family School showed that broadly, the proportion of US households who give is declining, even while total giving increases. So we wanted to test whether that was true for women in particular. And then finally, we had some initial data a few years ago that showed that women's giving might be affected by COVID in some unique ways, kind of a warning bell, if you will. And we wanted to dig in with more reliable data and learn more about that impact. So our latest Women Give report is more detailed than just 2 or 3 slides, but I want to start by zooming out to show that 20-year view. We often talk about donors down, dollars up, or declining donors. If you've heard either of those two phrases, essentially what this means is there's a smaller number of US households giving to charity. And at the same time, charitable giving through Giving USA, we know is reaching record highs. And so it's if you're someone who's concerned about the democratization of philanthropy or how much philanthropic power is concentrated in very few philanthropists' hands, this is something that you need to be paying attention to. But even with this donors down, dollars up larger trend, we do see gender differences. So the decline in donors started later and was less pronounced for single women compared to single men. So what we termed trend number 1 of 5 is women's recovery, the recovery of women's philanthropy in the post-COVID era. So we looked specifically at giving during the COVID pandemic in addition to this broad 20-year view. And we saw that during the pandemic, single women's giving participation declined, but their average giving amounts increased. Which shows us that women's giving rates were more resilient prior to COVID. So, we saw that during 9/11, during the Great Recession, during these other challenging times, or what economists call shocks, whether they're economic or social, women's giving was very resilient. And then COVID, in some ways, is really unique because our giving as women did decline, our giving participation did decline, and that 2020 reversed a long trend in women's philanthropy. We also analyzed the impact of different COVID effects on giving, like whether a person actually had COVID, whether the pandemic forced them to work remotely full time. And so these all make a difference. But the one that makes a difference by gender is that women who lost earnings during COVID were less likely to give to charity. And so that's showing us essentially that something around COVID that's not necessarily disease based, but is income based, means that women's philanthropy is less resilient compared to single men or married couples. Our second trend is women in sports. So in addition to the continued recovery of women's philanthropy post-COVID, women's sports have been and continue to be a key topic of conversation in all of society, but in philanthropy in particular as well. Since Title IX's passage in 1972, female athletes and advocates have fueled a revolution in women's sports. And that's driven massive growth in participation of women and girls in sports, in philanthropy to these causes, and then in visibility of women in sports. Although, of course, significant gaps remain, but one kind of positive story was that the Paris Olympics last year were the first gender equal Olympics where we had an equal number of men and women competing. I mentioned our Mays Institute, Mays Family Institute for Diverse Philanthropy at the top of the hour. We have some really cool programs like this institute's Athlete to Advocate program. Essentially, the Mays Institute trains professional athletes in strategic philanthropy and advocacy. I think it's a very cool program, but it is just one of many that exemplifies the momentum behind using sports as a platform for equity and social change. Our third trend, sorry, is health disparities. We know from so much research that there are gendered health disparities. It's been really well established that women have lower levels of access to and outcomes health wise. One reason for that is that, historically women haven't always been included in medical studies or pharmaceutical trials that have these major outcomes. And we know that this trend is especially the case for other marginalized groups like women of color. So, despite these disparities, philanthropy for women's health has really gained momentum in recent years. But one kind of bright spot in 2024 was Melinda French Gates's announcement that she would dedicate $250 million to enhancing women and girls and their mental and physical health worldwide. And so she's kind of still in the process of making those grants. But we see that this kind of announcement, this attention, and the leadership that she is showing is really significant. And then, of course, she's just one example of many donors who have contributed to women's health. The fourth trend I want to mention is AI's influence on philanthropy. I know that AI is a bit of a hot topic, and our colleagues have some studies that show that the philanthropic sector, fundraisers, nonprofits are already exploring and growing how AI can enhance their strategy and their operations. At the same time, this really highlights the need for transparent and inclusive practices. So I know that some of us may be a little bit hesitant about AI and adopting it. Really, at this point, I think it's here. We can't put it back in the box. And the issue for our sector to grapple with is that we're a field that's supposed to be human first, community first, social good first, not necessarily worrying about profit or dollars. So that means that we need to be visible and transparent about how we, whether organizations, individuals, nonprofits, or funders, are using AI. We have something of a social responsibility to get that balance right. And that includes thinking through policies and governance around AI. In this area, trust and transparency is really vital. We know of some other studies, not by WPI, that show that funders and donors really are open to nonprofits using AI as long as they know, we used this to work on our social media content or to review this. We never put donor information into these tools. So just not necessarily that you can't use it, but you need to really sit back and think through the governance and the policies of your organization with regards to AI. And there are so many great examples out there already. You don't have to create the wheel. The final trend, which I do want to say for the record, we developed before the first of this year, is political polarization and how philanthropy can respond to it. We know that polarization is an increasing concern for philanthropy, and nonprofits and philanthropic organizations are just trying to navigate this rapidly growing social divide. And we're not here today to kind of weigh in on the politics of it, but we are here to say, this polarization is affecting people's ability to raise funds for the organizations that they care about. It's affecting people's ability to kind of communicate across the aisle, to donors from across the political spectrum. And so our advice is twofold. First is to find areas of common ground. It seems like we're more polarized than ever, but the areas of common ground do exist. And one example of this was during the election, even though, President Trump was at the top of the ticket and received more votes, there were some states that actually approved and passed ballot measures to protect reproductive rights. And so this shows that there are just plenty of opportunities to engage where people do agree. And the other thing that I would say is go local. So look for common ground and go local. The national political stage is just naturally going to be more polarized compared to how people feel about their own communities, whether that's the state or local level. It's a lot harder to get angry and be kind of an online troll for someone who lives in your neighborhood. And so these kind of state and local policies can be a little bit easier to navigate than the national level. I want to circle back to collective giving, which I mentioned earlier. It especially resonates with women donors. Our research addresses collective giving in a few ways. So we did a study on Giving Tuesday some years ago and found that women are more likely than men to give on that day. And we have a few studies on collective giving and giving circles that emphasize the importance of women in this area. They are the strong majority of members, and they drive this giving in a big way. The reason I want to bring up collective giving is that this is a really great example of how any person, any woman, no matter her income, wealth, education, can participate in philanthropy. We hear a lot about the millionaires and the billionaires, but collective giving is making a difference, and collectively, billions of dollars with a B has been given to nonprofits across the country and around the world through collective giving. So that's kind of the everyday donor perspective. But I do want to talk about mega donors. We know that women across the financial spectrum are participating in or leading in philanthropy, but we're also seeing leadership from ultra wealthy women as well. Mackenzie Scott, Melinda French Gates are often central to these conversations, as they should be. They're examples of big giving, but also giving in a really unique way that reflects larger women's philanthropy trends, like trust-based philanthropy. The research has shown that, at least as of a few years ago, women tend to give anonymously at a higher rate than men. But we are seeing anecdotal change, at least in the last few years, with philanthropic role models like the folks you see on the screen. I want to take a minute to focus, though, on this person on the right, Ruth Gottsman. She was in the news quite a bit, so you may have heard of her, but if you missed this one story, she has not been in the headlines quite so much as these other two women. She was profiled for her $1 billion, again, billion with a B, gift to the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And I just really love her story because it reflects so much of what our research has found and what we expect will happen as wealthy women get older and start to consider their legacy. So Ruth was already engaged in the college. She had been staff, she had been faculty, she had served on the board, she had served as board chair. And so we know that women are more likely to give to organizations that they're already engaged with in some way. And then also, her gift was for students. It wasn't to build a new building. It wasn't to name a professor. It was for tuition. She wanted to leave a legacy with individuals. And then one other thing I noticed in her story is that the school offered to change their name to reflect the gift. It's often an incentive for donors, and she refused. And that reflects our research that shows that women's giving is more about the impact than about the benefits a donor might receive from their philanthropy. We talk a lot to fundraisers who, they have kind of a checklist of benefits that they can provide to donors. And we know that that often is just a turnoff for women donors as opposed to men. The one benefit of giving that does seem to appeal to women donors is the opportunity to create community and to get together, have events, get to know one another, and learn from one another. So in preparation for this presentation, Angela and I talked a lot about having you walk away not only with research and information about trends in women's philanthropy, but with actions, next steps, practical tips that you can take to grow and enhance your philanthropy if you're a donor, or you're fundraising your work as a fundraiser or nonprofit professional. So I'll close with a couple of resources or actions that you can take. And one of them is the 7 T's of women's philanthropy. Those of you familiar with philanthropy are probably familiar with this kind of quick and easy 3 T's definition of philanthropy as time, talent, treasure. So giving money, volunteering, maybe serving on a board, volunteering your expertise. We have gone a little bit overboard and added 4 T's to that. So we have testimony, which essentially is sharing your story. It's sharing why you are giving to certain areas, and using your own story as an example to others who may have money or time or talent to donate. Um, Ties are about connections, about networking. We know that women tend to be more inclusive and want to bring more people to the table, especially when talking about philanthropy. So using your ties can be anything from talking to your best friends about your giving, encouraging them to plug in, to bringing your kids, grandkids, or others into conversations about philanthropy, passing those values on to the next generation. And then finally, trust and transparency are really key and somewhat interrelated. And this goes both ways. We talk a lot about nonprofits needing to build trust with donors. That's super important. But donors also have a responsibility to build trust with the nonprofits that they donate to, especially with trust and transparency. So trust can be as simple as, can donors make more of their donations unrestricted? Can they simplify grant reporting requirements to be less burdensome? Transparency can be as simple as being really forthcoming with nonprofits, whether it's, this is a one-time gift. I'm not going to re-up. Spend your time and effort elsewhere. You don't need to take me to lunch, freeing them essentially to pursue other opportunities. Or this is an initial gift. I want to hear more from you about these specific items, and these are the sorts of results that I would want to see to give a multi-year gift. I also want to plug one of the resources that we provide specifically to fundraisers and nonprofit leaders called Proven Practices in Women's Philanthropy. Excuse me. It's grounded in our WPI research, and it focuses on research-informed practices and highlights ways to successfully apply them to organizational growth and development. It's based around a short assessment that you take to identify where you're already implementing women's philanthropy principles in your work, as well as where you could be doing things differently. So you've got the QR code. The URL is unfortunately a little bit long, but I'm hoping that you can check that out if you're a nonprofit professional that just wants to know where to start with women's philanthropy. It is a super practical resource. There are templates, etc., and I hope you'll check that out. And I'll just close this section before we move to Q&A by reminding you, please stay in touch with us. We hope that our research is valuable to you, but we know we can't do the research without knowing what your experiences are, what questions you want answered, and we find your input to be so helpful in doing our own work. So please use us as a resource. I talked about 5 trends. We also had a recent webinar where I talked with a few other panelists who are much more expert in some of these areas than me, especially AI. That's on our school's YouTube channel, so I encourage you to check that out if any of those trends in particular are of interest to you. And with that, I will stop sharing and turn the mic back to Angela.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you walking us through that so clearly, so well. I think I'm seeing lots of heads nodding and smiles that yes, we get that. That's a lot of research to cover. From that, I've taken just a couple things, points about how we could potentially implement this in our fundraising offices, right? And some of what she's learned. And one, we would need to first start by analyzing our donor bases. We need to know what percentage of women are donors. Do we have empty fields in the spouse, field in our databases? I've worked with some organizations along that line. Um, that dealt with that and didn't realize upon investigation that 38% of the checks were actually being signed by women. So they were sending out thank you notes to men, and women were actually the ones making the gifts. So things like that matter. Getting, thank you notes when, for example, it happens with us a lot. We'll use my husband's corporate match, and we get letters from organizations that I'm deeply involved with and care about that say, thank you, Duck. And so those things matter. We catch that as women. So that's something we can quickly fix on the back end. So we want to think about that. Also, evaluate your case statement. You heard that, how much women care about impact. So how can you make your organization really seem relevant and demonstrate to a woman how her gift is going to make a difference? Even if it's her gift joined with other women through giving circles. And the final thing I think we heard was we need to make giving easy. These historically, we've been juggling a lot of things. Some of us are working, some of us are moms, some of us have elder care issues. There are all sorts of things happening in our lives besides our career and our philanthropy and our volunteerism. Make it easy to give. You notice that there's a high percentage of women who are giving online. But those are some of my practical fundraising tips, and would love to open up to just let you ask questions to see if there's anything that Jackie or me or any of my colleagues that have joined us could answer.
If I can just jump in really quickly, I do see a question in the chat from Benjamin. Are topics only for women? And the answer is yes and no. So essentially, the research that we do is entirely centered on gender and philanthropy. And so that means that in a lot of our research, we study women and men. We study gender differences. But in the kind of how to apply the research, we do focus on women. Our perspective is essentially that the fundraising profession was built with a specific donor type in mind, and it is a white, straight male donor. And so we do, when we talk about research to practice, try to help fundraisers and nonprofit professionals learn how to engage with those donors a little bit better, because we feel like the kind of typical donor that fundraising was created for are pretty well covered already. So that's our perspective. We also, in addition to studying gender and philanthropy on the donor side, a couple things that I didn't get into are we have a new kind of area of philanthropy giving to women's and girls' causes that we have done research on. That is for women and men because we know that we need support from both women and men to get to a gender equal society, or to affect many of the issues that affect women and girls differently in the U.S. and around the world. And then the final kind of area that we are just starting to dig into, we don't have published research on this yet, is the fundraiser side. So how are women doing fundraising differently, leading nonprofits differently? We know that women fundraisers encounter some unique challenges, and that is certainly a topic that, sure, it is for women nonprofit professionals, but it's also for the men who manage them, who report up to them, who are their colleagues, who are donors who interact with them. And so we hope that even though our research is centered around women donors, recipients, and nonprofit leaders, that our research is super relevant for men in society and philanthropy and nonprofits.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jackie. I see another question here. One of our participants is wondering if there are websites we can look up to where we can find women donors for women-related causes.
So I will share, I will share a different different resource. We do have a website where you can look up women's and girls organizations. So the Women and Girls Index is something that we developed at WPI back in 2019. It's essentially a database, but we do have reports and infographics and so forth. So you're not just looking at like an Excel file, but it's full of organizations that serve women and girls. So if you are a donor or someone who cares about women's and girls issues, you can look at that, and you can even drill down to organizations in my zip code that serve women's health, or women's reproductive health or women's economic empowerment, et cetera. So you can really drill down there. As far as the funder side, there are certainly resources like Foundation Center and so forth. Um, but it's hard to find kind of a database of those funders aside from Foundation Center, which can be kind of prohibitively expensive. Um, I would just recommend that any donor can be a donor to women and girls, and it's all in how you're framing it. So we know from our research that women tend to give to women and girls because they can see themselves in the recipient, or they encountered some challenges that this organization is trying to work toward. So that's a way to appeal to women donors. Men donors tend to give because either they know a woman who has experienced these issues, and they have kind of empathy through, my mom had breast cancer, my wife had this issue, was not as well paid as her male colleagues, et cetera. But there's also kind of the concept that raising the bar for women, or that a rising tide lifts all boats, essentially. And so we can't have a really thriving society until women and girls are also thriving. So I'll drop the link in the chat to the Women and Girls Index. But that's all I've got as far as donors. Trust me, if I knew like a database for donors to women's and girls causes, I would also be hitting that up.
With private foundations, you can also go into Candid, look at their 990, and see if they are giving to organizations. That's a very long process. Any of you that have interns, that's a great summer intern job. It helps the intern learn a little bit about the organization as well. But if it's not very practical to do across hundreds, but if you have 4 or 5 foundations in your area that you're wondering if they support organizations like yours, that's a great way to take a couple hours and figure that out. Looks like we have another question. Brittany.
Hi. First of all, I want to say thank y'all for having this discussion. This is incredible. And I'm such a fan of the work that both of y'all do. And War Eagle from Auburn, I had to say it. I have a practical question regarding I work with an organization that focuses on helping those that are 60 and older remain independent in their own homes through using volunteers to help with transportation, that type of thing. 90% of our donors are women, and it's small donations. And then we have, I would say, 80 to 90% of our volunteers are women as well. Most of them are 60 plus too, like on the edge of needing the service themselves. The issue that I'm having, I would love to know if you could help me see how to talk to these women and to their caregivers or to their family members, or even their spouses, about how they can continue to support this effort financially, because we know most of the people we're going to be assisting are going to be women as well, because we're outliving men. But I'm having a difficult time kind of breaking through perhaps a generational divide on this fundraising issue.
Right. I think so. What I would say is, first of all, especially with women of a certain age, you want to be focused on legacy gifts. I know it's hard when you need the money now, and not in like 5, 10, 20, 30 years. But women view their money differently. And so a lot of women do have a little bit less to give, or want to be really conservative because they know they're living longer and they don't want to give away their funds when they might actually need them later in life. And so a legacy gift is a really great option for a woman who does have funds to give, but is really hesitant and has kind of a worry of outliving her funds. The other option for folks like that is just giving a small amount, or increasing giving. You give $30 a month, can you give $50 a month? Doing that kind of across your donor database, even though it's a small difference individually, does make a huge difference. The other thing I would say is, you're not alone in this. You have hospitals with grateful patient programs. You have all sorts of organizations that rely on donors who have received services in the past, whether that's to donate or to kind of share with their networks that might have more resources. So I don't think, I would be surprised if you encountered a lot of people who are just completely taken aback that you would share that this is a nonprofit, that you rely on donations, and that, as they're considering where they're giving, this could be a great cause for them. And I think that, um, kids and grandkids want to know about that too. And so I don't know. I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. And some of it might just be frankly awkwardness. It's awkward to be like, hey, you're gonna die and we'd love your money when that happens. That's not the tone that you're taking. There are so many great examples of talking through, you've given so much to us. You've been such a great example of this. What do you want your legacy to be? Do you want your legacy to be giving back to folks who might be in a similar situation to you? So there are plenty of ways of talking about challenging things, without appearing flippant, or disrespectful. But I would say, legacy gifts, I would say involving the younger generations, and just, I think a lot of it is kind of a mental block on fundraisers' parts. Like, it's weird asking for money. It's awkward. And what we try to rely on, at least in our research, is, um, the idea that the donor is getting something, whether it's, what research calls the warm glow or some other benefit. We know that charitable giving is linked to a longer lifespan, greater health. We know it's linked to all sorts of positive outcomes, including life satisfaction, as one of our studies did. So, essentially by asking someone to donate, you are giving them an opportunity to increase their life satisfaction, increase their longevity. There are, of course, some causal issues with the analysis there, but you are giving folks a gift by enabling them to give back. And I think that's an important perspective for a lot of fundraisers.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Brittany,
much.
the other thing you might try is the practical element. If we're looking at local foundation funding, uh, women entrepreneurs who are doing well and have started, they're really taking a lead as a major donor in your community. If we look at the relevancy of how this is freeing a burden for other women in the community to be able to take care of their families, to help build their businesses, recognizing that idea that elder care is something we care about, but it's difficult in the sandwich generation. I mean, if you start really parsing your donor base and get into that specific segment, I think you have a good chance at a lot of those $10,000 to $100,000 gifts that are good for operating to keep you going year to year. So maybe that would work too.
That's so helpful. Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions? We might have time for one more. Well, with that, Jackie, I guess you have beautifully explained everything, and have given us a lot to ponder. We're so grateful that you're willing to take time to do this. I know some of your work is, your goal is to try and get this research out, and we hope that everybody that's joined here will go out and share a little bit about what they've learned and a little bit about WPI and also about our center here at Texas A&M. There are a lot of us that care about the type of work that you're doing, specifically within the Bush School. We have Dr. Brown, Dr. Taylor. We also have Dr. Robichaux and Dr. Chu that care about nonprofit. So there are 5 of us that really work on this. And if there's anything you can do or we can do to help you, just reach out to the center and we'll see what we can. I can't promise everything. It's a small, we're only 5 of the faculty at a massive flagship school, right? But we will do what we can or try and connect you with folks. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for your great questions. And Angela, thanks so much for the invitation. Please use WPI as a resource however we can. I know the slides will go out with our contact info. So thank you so much.
Jacqueline, thank you very much. Wonderful to have you. Angela, thanks for the wonderful session.
Thank you so much, everyone.